Is it dangerous to treat emotional intelligence as a universal standard?
We don't take the time to get the information needed to fill those pockets where bias sits. Bias is what fills those pockets, those blind spots. And so it's like, oh, brain is, being lazy. So I'm going to just go ahead and fill this in. And we're like, no, what if you told bias to stand up and move aside so that you can actually fill that seat with the right information?
In the US, you're constantly, and especially right now, consistently reminded that you're an immigrant. And when you go back to the native country, that I never grew up there, but I go back there, I am reminded that I am too American. And there is this place in the middle then that I think a lot of first generation immigrant kids experience of where do I then belong?
When I was going in schools, there was a clear difference between me as a Black Haitian girl and my peers that were Black African American. And so just even that dynamic was becoming clear, not just in food, but in language, sometimes in values. Unfortunately, there were stereotypes that I kind of had to clear up with my parents.
A lot of times within ethnic communities or just any communities, and immigrants, like there's this pressure of, survival, success, making it in this new country, something that, your parents or whatever generation came here did that. And then the next generation is assimilating a little bit more. The next generation is assimilating it even more than that. There's again this grievance of losing a part of that culture. But I also see that as this is what our world has been for generations, thousands of years, is that we have always as humans migrated into places. So the culture that we are so deeply just holding on to is also an evolvement from a separate migration. Behind every opinion, every conflict, and every moment of courage, there is a human story longing to be understood. I'm Dr. Payal Beri, and this is Reframing Perspectives, a space for conversations that help us see ourselves and each other with more honesty and curiosity so that we can build empathy and compassion in our world. Here in these episodes, we're going to explore the layers of what it means to be human in leadership, in society, and in our everyday lives, and how by understanding those layers, it can reshape our relationships, our communities, and our impact. So let's step inside and let's begin. We talk about emotional intelligence as if it's universal, as if empathy, communication, or self-regulation mean the same thing for everyone. But what happens when culture, identity, upbringing change how we express emotion, how we set boundaries, how we even define respect? My guest today, Farah Harris, is a psychotherapist, an emotional intelligence expert, and the founder of Working Well Daily. Born in Haiti and raised in the US, Farah brings a perspective that challenges the idea that EQ can ever be one size fits all. Her story growing up as a Haitian American gives her deep understanding of how culture shapes the emotional language we speak and how those differences can lead to both misunderstandings and deeper connection. In this conversation, we're going to explore that emotional intelligence looks like across cultures, from immigrant households to second generation Americans, from collectivist cultures to individualistic ones. Because when we assume we understand someone's emotions simply because we recognize their skin color or background, we risk missing who they actually are and the nuances. So I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. I hope that you get a lot out of it too. I am so excited. I feel like I say this in every podcast episode, but it's so true. I cannot wait to dive into everything with you, Farah. First of all, I bought your book 2.5 years ago. Before I just reached out to you just this year and I read your book, and I can't tell you how many clients of mine I just handed out to. I'm just you need to read this. You need to read this, because the fact that you're talking about EQ for people of color it blows my mind that it hasn't been covered. It's just we are a majority of the population of the world, and yet we haven't talked about this thing.
Nope.
For a collective group that I would say that belong to collectivist cultures, where emotion plays such a big part of our world, right? How much, and when I talk about, let's talk about the guilt trips, let's talk about the family pressures, let's talk about the, how dare you say a boundary? Do you know what a boundary is? I'll tell you what a boundary is, right? And so I cannot wait to dive into when we talk about what it means to have emotional intelligence as people of color. And what I'm so excited is that we're not focusing on a specific culture. culture. We're not focusing on this culture, that culture. We're talking about the nuances of what it means to be a human being and happen to also be a person of color who happens to belong to certain demographics and cultures and all of that thing. So we're just going to dive all in.
Yay. I'm excited. And first, before we even dive into this conversation, thank you for having me. And for all of you who are listening, go ahead, quickly like, share, subscribe, do all that you need to do, because it's not easy having a podcast. It is like another job. And so to have the time to sit, to share space with all of you listeners, I just want you all to encourage Dr. Payal so that you can do that. Okay. That's my little push.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. And this podcast is my baby. It's like my favorite thing to do. I think a podcast is the best thing that could happen to a person who's really chatty. Like, I love being a chatty cat. Like, I love it. Like, so, you know, when I was younger, being Indian, I was always told, like, you talk too much. You talk too much. Well, guess what? I've made it my job now. So good.
The thing that the teacher said at every parent-teacher conference. Yeah. I'm very familiar with that.
So let's dive in. I want to start from the very beginning. You've told me, you know, you're Haitian and you came here at a really young age to the U.S. And so you grew up as Haitian American and grew up in a very Haitian household. What does that mean? What does that look like when we talk about that unique duality of holding the space of being an American and being Haitian?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I'm the oldest of three. So as you shared, I was born in
got first daughter trauma on top of that.
Yeah. And I would have to say that my parents did very well, that I don't think I carry much of the trauma. There's definitely awareness of the difference in dynamics, but my parents did the best that they could, and the best they did was actually well. So, the nuance of recognizing that as the firstborn who came to the country with parents who are trying to figure out how to live, where to go, where to make something of themselves, how to start over. There are things in our relationship, you know, between parent and child that are very different from what I see with my younger siblings. They literally, the U.S. is all they know. Though we had the same food at home, which was, you know, Haitian food, and we were listening to a mixture of Haitian Creole and French and English at home, there's still a difference in dynamic. Yes, being the oldest child, but then two, being the child that has more of the story that's connected to the parents than my siblings. So they would speak predominantly Creole to me. I could sometimes speak Creole back, but they would speak predominantly English to my brother and sister. So it's very interesting now that, you know, like I'm in my mid-40s, my siblings are in their 30s, and I would catch my mom and dad do this all the time. They'll, without thinking about it, speak Creole to me and then turn to my siblings and start speaking in English. And I was like, do you notice that it's almost like those are my English kids, those are my, you know, my American kids, and that's my Haitian daughter. And so it was very interesting too to recognize the difference, not just in Haitian versus American, but if we're going into the concept of race, then it was like, okay, when you look at me, I'm a Black woman. But when I was going in schools, there was a clear difference between me as a Black Haitian girl and my peers that were Black African American. And so just even that dynamic was becoming clear, not just in food, but in language, sometimes in values. And so unfortunately, there were stereotypes that I kind of had to clear up with my parents. You know, it's like what we see on the news or what do we hear, you know, on television or whatever weren't always positive in terms of African Americans. And so there was that whole dynamic we had to discuss and talk about. So I would say that there was a lot of privilege, that the place that my parents ended up making roots in was actually a very diverse community. So if anybody's familiar with Evanston, Illinois, which is where Northwestern is at, but we don't really claim it's not a college town. Like Evanston is very much its own place. And we, you know, definitely had this beautiful, vibrant, diverse community where there was Mexicans, there were Koreans, there were Chinese, there were Jamaicans, you know, and I remember at the lunch table in high school, there were those that were Jamaican sat over there, those that were Nigerian over here, the Haitians. There was segregation to a certain degree, but then also this sense of community and appreciation of other cultures. So it was just this beautiful dynamic of just recognizing what I think we all are looking to experience here in the United States, of that mixing and that melding, but at the same time, still wanting to be distinct and acknowledge the difference of who you are and your cultural background.
When you're talking about that part of how your parents turn to your siblings of speaking in English and to you in Creole, then having to address the difference of the stereotypes and all of these pieces, immediately it gives me like the idea and the visualization of an onion, right? And it's just like being an immigrant and being someone who's coming to this place, right? It's these layers of, okay, so there's this one layer of my parents having a childhood somewhere else and they're coming here now. Second layer is me being the eldest and this shared experience I have. And now me being this like middle person between my siblings and my parents, and kind of being this, like, I always say the first sibling is almost plays like junior parent.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I had that with my brother. My brother's like 3.5 years older. And I know that when we immigrated to the US, they really relied on my brother to help raise me because he could understand and kind of shape things a little bit differently than they would be able to share with me. And it really was. And it's so interesting that you say this. So my parents spoke in Hindi to my brother and I, and we grew up with that. But I always respond in English. I don't speak in Hindi to them. I can speak fluently, but I have this rule for some reason that I will only speak in Hindi to you if you can't speak English. So like I just have this thing, but I know where it comes from is because when I was younger, my brother would like laugh at me for my accent and speaking in Hindi. So I had
that
like
trial that's a whole other conversation. I don't know if we have the time today to even talk about how that impacts first gen, second gen, third gen, where you feel a level of identity connected to this culture that you may not have grown up in, right? In terms of living in the country. But again, it's in the food, it's in the smells, it's in the clothing, it's in your taste and all this other stuff. And then you say something and they're like, oh, you're not real. You're not 100%. And it's like, yeah. And so it hinders you, which I find interesting because if you were a foreigner trying to speak the language, there's this, oh, wow, look at you trying. It's so admirable. And I'm like, what about me? I was trying, and it's like, you know, and then there's
no, but you are, so you should know it as is, right?
And they don't add to the fact that there are reasons why maybe the accent is not as smooth. And it could be like, for instance, for my parents, we want you to be able to be successful here. And so if English is this language, we want you to be able to master it, you know, do whatever it is that you need to do with it. And then you have other people who are like, okay, we want that too. But at the same time, in this house, we're only speaking Spanish, we're only speaking Creole or whatever. And so I think we don't take the time to really be curious as to the story. Like, I feel that they think that parents, like, they almost shame parents for having children who don't speak the mother tongue with ease and fluency. And I was like, that's not really fair, because you're not being curious to the story as to why. Yeah, maybe some were lazy, but I don't believe that's the majority.
Yeah, and there's those nuances then that come into where, as an immigrant, I can relate to everything you're saying. Even though I grew up, you know, as Indian and you're Haitian, I still relate to those layers of what it means to be an immigrant. You know, I came here at the age of we settled in California by the age of I was 10 years old. So prior to that, you know, grew up in the Middle East and Egypt, Dubai, Iraq, everywhere else, didn't actually ever live in India, but would go back to India to visit all the time. So speaking about language and that relationship is, I recently just went back to India after 12 years. I hadn't been in a really long time. I was really excited. I hadn't been ever since my maternal grandmother passed away. And so it was a form of closure for me as well. So I went, and I have cousins there. And mind you, these are cousins that I'm on WhatsApp with. You know, we talk all the time, all these things. But when I am there, I literally got asked the question, how do you speak Hindi so fluently? And it's like, I'm Indian, by the way. I have Indian parents. Right. It was really interesting for me. Like, it'd be interesting. Like, I was joking. I was just like, you know, I would get the question if I was like, wow, how do you speak Cantonese or Mandarin, right? But like I was speaking fluently and they were so surprised that I could speak so fluently. Of course, there were some grammar errors in here and there to catch myself. But that, or when the, aunts and uncles and cousins and everyone's sitting and my mom's there and we're laughing, whatever. And they're staring at me because they're watching me to see. And when everyone would laugh and I wouldn't, they're like, oh, see, she didn't understand it. She didn't get it. And I was like, no, I did understand. I just didn't think it was funny.
It's funny.
Like, I just didn't think it was funny. And it was like, it was so interesting because I have this relationship of, in the US, you're constantly, and especially right now, consistently reminded that you're an immigrant. And when you go back to the native country, and again, I never grew up there, but I go back there, I am reminded that I am too American. And there is this place in the middle then that I think a lot of first generation immigrant kids experience of where do I then belong? And I think that what happens is we try to fit ourselves in somewhere. But the thing is, and this was the beautiful thing that I learned just in this recent trip, because I went via Hong Kong. And so I was in Hong Kong for a few days or a day or so. And Hong Kong is a global hub. And so in this global hub, you've got people from all over the world. And I'm not kidding you. I felt a wave of this feeling and this like whiff of taking me back to being a 7-year-old in Egypt. Because when I grew up in Egypt, I went to an international school. I was around kids that were German, that were Japanese, that were Persian, that were everything. And I got this whiff of like, that felt more like home than either being in the US or in India. And there was this feeling of third culture kid feeling that I just had of, oh, I need to stop trying to fit myself into feeling like, no, validate me, I'm Indian enough, or oh, validate me, I'm American enough. It's like, no, I'm just a global mutt. I'm a global mutt.
I'm in the middle.
Yeah.
And sometimes the middle is messy and there's tension there. And I think it is a challenge where you're trying to figure out what does your identity look like in that space. Right. And so it's very interesting that you felt the sense of belonging in a place that someone would be like, what? Hong Kong?
Yeah, exactly. I can't speak the language. I couldn't do anything. But yet I felt this like, oh, I could breathe here.
That is so wild. That is so wild.
Yeah.
But yet, though I've not had that experience, I can completely empathize with everything you just said.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious that what did emotional expression look like in your home growing up?
So we were talking off record about how I follow several like Haitian Instagram profiles and channels, and there's always the sense of community to a certain degree that's there. But then I also recognize the outsider of me, depending on like how people are commenting, if it's all in Creole or if it's, relating so much to the content. And I can see that, I can kind of relate to that, but that's not really my story, especially when it comes to Haitian parents. So like the stereotype is that Haitian parents are not overtly affectionate. They're not overtly communicative, especially when expressing, tender emotions. They use insults as a way of showing love, like all these things that I've seen, but I've not experienced. Like, so my parents both come from their own personal traumas. And I think I got privileged to have parents that, though they never went to therapy, they had this level of self-awareness as individuals of recognizing I have some stuff that I don't like, and I do not want to give this to my next generation of children. And so I always heard I love you. I always got hugs and kisses. To this day, as a 45 going on 46-year-old, like my parents are going to grab and hold on to me. There was never a question of saying I love you to them and then they go, okay. That's nice. Fi, can you go do something or whatever? It was always like, oh, I love you. My mom, I love you more. Like, that's her thing. I'm like, we don't need a Trump love. Like, just, just let us love freely. But it was very affirming. My father was such an affirming man, still is a very affirming man. Yes, there were things that were not perfect. I don't know what family actually has perfection as their baseline, but it was definitely counter what I am seeing when folks are talking about the expression of emotions, the way they communicate, the way that they connected, attachment, that kind of a thing with their Haitian parents. Now, me and my dad are very much readers, intellectuals, whatever you want to call it, so that when we would have moments of challenge and difficulty, I would write out my feelings and was like, I'm angry with you because X, Y, and Z.
Wow.
And he would write me back. Like, that's how we used to deal with conflict.
Oh,
yeah, it was crazy.
That is not.
No, stop.
That is no.
It's not typical.
No.
But then there was other times where writing was not.
What does that feel like?
I just clearly remember I can remember at least 3 times, and I can't even tell you what the conflict was, but I do know that at least 3 times we wrote and exchanged our grievances to each other so that it could be clear. And I was young. And I think my dad may have appreciated this because he's a writer and he's a reader. And he probably was like, oh, my daughter is so smart. Look at how she tries to handle conflict. So I think there was a level of respect and admiration in the vehicle that I chose to use to address conflict with him. And that it was something also that he may not have always been able to get from my mom. So because of my mom's trauma, her words would get caught here. So there would be so many things she would want to say, but she just wouldn't know how to express it until it, got too much. So it would take time. Like he would have to pull things out of her. And she's much better now. She's like, he probably wishes I could shut up. It's like, you created this monster. But, my mom was the one that was way more verbal. So conversations had to be dealt with, processed, lectures had to be heard, whatever the case had to be for us to finally get it out. So it was definitely a dynamic of 2 ways of expression of emotions and dealing with conflict. But my dad also wrestled with truly saying I'm sorry. And that I can confirm within the Haitian culture that it's not I'm sorry. It's, oh, didn't you say you liked those jeans? Oh, are you hungry? And it was like, we haven't reconciled yet. But, that was his form of reconciliation was to do something, nice, to buy us something or whatever to appease the situation. Yeah. And my siblings and I picked that up real quick. I was like, that is not going to say sorry, but he'll buy you dinner.
It's the acts of services of these immigrant fathers. Their whole life is defined by, I have to provide for my family. I have to provide. And it's the same thing in my home where if I open the fridge and I say, oh man, we're out of avocados, the next day there will be 2 crates of it. If I'm like, oh, I'm craving this one coconut water. Then, or if my father sees me carrying a coconut water around, suddenly there's 4 carts. I'm like, I just really wanted that one. I didn't want more.
I didn't want more.
That's how they do it. And to your point, I'm just thinking about this. When I say thank you to my dad for something oh, thanks. And his response is, that's how it's not you're welcome. It's not anything. It's
acknowledgement. It's a verbal acknowledgement.
It's this to say you're welcome. It's and if it's said, if my dad says thank you, by the way, it's he says it, oh, thank you, kind of making the, letting you know that I'm being sarcastic because this is the new generation's way of being so it's just, there's so much of that. And again, going back to that, layers of the onion, there's that layer of being an immigrant. And I say this, and I know I said this to you when we were, voice memoing a few months ago, that sometimes being a third culture kid where I'm not someone who was born and raised here. I wasn't born in India and then come here. I grew up, in a third place. Sometimes I actually relate better to my immigrant friends who are Nigerian, who are Kenyan, who are, South African versus necessarily relating to my friends who are Indian who are born and raised in America. And it's that immigrant because my friends who are born and raised in America, yes, there are some things that we relate to as being Indian, like Indian parents, the traditions, the culture, like for sure. But there's this perspective of having lived in a different country and understanding that you belong to a world and it's not this very American-centric perspective that is natural because wherever you grow up, you take on without even knowing it, right? It just infiltrates you, it just influences you and it's normalized. But there's these tiny nuances that even being an Indian in the US or in any Western country that you get, and I have them, but when you haven't had the experience of living and growing up somewhere else before coming here, I think that there's this American-centric perspective that just infiltrates you. And so it becomes harder to relate on certain aspects. And that just kind of goes back to this idea that I want to ask you about is it dangerous to treat emotional intelligence as a universal standard? Hi, friends. I have a favor to ask you. If you're enjoying these episodes, then I'd really love it if you could subscribe, leave a review, or share it with your friends and family. Your words help others discover that the stories and these episodes exist in the perspectives that we're exploring over here. And the more that we can grow, the more feedback that we get from you through those reviews, the more we can make sure that we're creating meaningful episodes that you want to listen to. You have no idea how much this helps and how much I appreciate you for doing this. So if you don't mind, whether it's following us, subscribing, hitting the button below, if you can leave a review for us, or if you just share this with your friends and family, the episodes that you think that they would really resonate with, it means more to us than you can imagine. Thank you so much.
The premise of my book, and when we were talking offline, and how you're like, I'm surprised that this has not been discussed before, which is why I almost didn't write the book, because I thought it was just kind of common sense. Like, how do you think we are all using the skill set in the same way? And the title of my first chapter is, we don't season chicken the same. Like, we don't even, chicken is so basic. Everybody knows chicken. Every country has chicken, but they have a signature chicken dish. It's either going to have chicken with curry, or you're going to have chicken with jerk seasoning, or you're going to, marinate it. You're going to bake it. What the point is,
or just boil it. We won't go there.
We're not going to go there because just the image just disgusted me. Let me have a moment. Ooh, okay, but because and to those who boil chicken, I am so sorry. That was not empathetic at all. Not
I'm
my
a chef's daughter. I cannot just boil chicken, but yes.
Yeah. So. And the whole concept of cleaning chicken, that's a whole thing that I've been seeing online too, the debates. But the point is that we can have something where it is universal. It's a universal meal that everyone has had. They've had chicken for dinner, but have they had the same way of preparation of that chicken? No. And so, yes, we all experienced emotions. It's the human experience to feel. But are we smart with it? Do we have an understanding of emotions? Are we using emotions and receiving emotions and interpreting emotions in the same way? No, because we have all of these unique presuppositions based off of our culture, based off of our lived experiences. And so I really am shocked again that, with all the research that's been done around EQ, that this lens of color was not used to be able to say, hey, here's the basic foundation of it, but this is what it looks like for someone who has experienced trauma. This is what it looks like for someone who has a disability. This is what it looks like for someone who had dealt with systemic, racism or misogyny, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to use the skill differently. And since I realized I was getting tired of no one having that conversation, I was like, I guess I'll start the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And you did it so beautifully because it is those, again, I'm going to use that word nuances, is you mentioned this in the beginning about how you show up Black And so then to the outside eye, they group you into, oh, okay, this is how Farah is going to respond to XYZ. This is how she's going to probably react to this. This is how she's going to think about this. But the context and the layers of the fact that you're Haitian. And so that culture is going to shape the way that you actually would react, how you would perceive things. How much of emotional expression is also then tied to values? Because that's what I feel like I'm hearing is that the values, like the way that we define happiness, joy, sadness, and what is given to that. So in certain cultures, for example, when someone passes away, they don't grieve it, they celebrate it. And in other cultures, you know, for example, in Hindu cultures, you are supposed to grieve for a whole year. If you smile, if you're happy, if you're doing anything, you are looked on as how could you? How I can't clearly
you did
not love enough. And so there's different ways of that showing up from this traditional cultural values. So how much do you say that emotion and the way of emotional expression is tied to the values of cultural roots?
I feel like as you were explaining that, it's this almost like a what is it called? A two-sided mirror? Is that what it is? So you
two
have
sides of the same coin kind of thing?
Well, it's two sides of the same coin, but like it's you know, one mirror is seeing one thing. And so that's me expressing culture based off of my own culture and experience. And then there's another mirror from that person who's viewing how I'm expressing or not expressing emotion based off of their own culture and expression, you know. So I think about like within the workplace where, and I want to say I may have shared her story in the book, where this woman who's Caribbean, very dynamic. We West Indian women can get loud, not because we're angry, but we can just be very expressive and we can be very passionate. That just seems natural, you know, within our culture. It's like, oh, okay, you know, she's really feeling this or whatever. But then in a corporate setting, that might be looked as aggressive. You know, oh my gosh, she's getting so loud. She's, you know, doing this. you know, then of course we're not going to get into the whole rabbit hole of I feel threatened, but all of these things can happen. It's really taking the time to be curious on, am I projecting my cultural lens onto someone expressing their culture in emotions to me? And I don't think we take enough time to, you know, take a beat and to be curious instead of going, that's not the right way to project. I mean, that's not the right way to emote, you know. So your story of someone's grieving for a year, not smiling, not showing contentment, you know, or anything being like joyful. And then someone coming into that space, not from that culture. And then you find out, oh yes, my husband passed away, you know, 6 months ago. And then they crack a joke. And all of a sudden now judgment and bias on this person. She must never have loved her husband. Oh my gosh, she is horrible. I bet you she'll be remarried by next week. You know, like all these things. And I was like, but maybe you don't understand that within her culture, and I'm not even talking about culture in terms of country, but culture within family, that maybe within her family dynamic, it was humor brings levity when we are dealing with stressful, unfortunate situations. And that's how we make it through. And so that's the thing that I'm hoping that people can just slow down. I mean, I know we're in this fast-paced world where everything is just microwaved and, you know, you instant this, instant that. It's hilarious I don't really watch TV, but if I do with my kids and they're like a mini 30-second commercial. And I was like, we sat through 2 minutes and 30 seconds of commercial.
I mean, those 2 minutes and 30 minutes, though, let's be real. That was like, okay, quickly go put the popcorn in the microwave while you go take a bathroom break. And then the win of like feeling like you made it right before it came back.
The show started.
Oh, it was like this, like, it was like a competition of like, who can, how do you
It was
do that?
also creating like, I think about memories. You know, I've had this conversation with my husband, but, you know, even with our children, I'm like, I really am curious when you become an adult, what will be those like points of references in your childhood? Because I know that music, I know that, you know, MTV, VH1, like, after school specials, TGIF, like there were
VIF, Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah, Saturday morning cartoons. And like, as a whole, we kind of had the same upbringing, so if you talk to another Gen X or millennial, it's like, oh yeah, I remember this. I remember this episode of Sesame Street, and these kids are just watching YouTube videos and whatever, and it's like, oh, I'm bored with that. Let me go on to something else. And it's so quick. And I feel like this is the same way that we're expecting people to show up. Like, I quickly want to view you in this way. And so I'm going to project that bias really quickly. And then more often than not, we're probably going to be wrong, but we just don't take the time to just ask questions like, what made you do that? You expressed it this way, and I'm curious as to why. And so to let us actually hear the story, because we connect by stories. And so like, the more I understand, your story, the more I feel connected to you. So like, even just our voice notes and the conversations that we've had today, I was like, oh yeah, I'm seeing her more and more now that she's sharing, these tidbits of her story, which again will also help me figure out how to communicate with you, work with you, collaborate, whatever it is. It's like, it just brings greater connection because I know your story.
I feel like for everything that you're saying, what I'm really hearing is like how context provides emotional maturity.
Ciao. I had a post. I want to say it was like last year on LinkedIn. The hook, because, that's what we have to do now, right? We got to hook them in, was my husband left me. And then I put like several breaks, and then was like, for 4 days on this work trip, blah, 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 blah. And then, I was like highlighting like, hey, when you do can we talk before you leave the office today? Can I have a conversation? When you don't give context, you now leave room for like complete emotional chaos to happen on the receiving end. What does this mean? Am I in trouble? What's going on? Like, I had friends texting me like, girl, you had me. I thought Michael did something. And I was like, context matters. And again, we don't take the time to get the information needed to fill those pockets where bias sits. Bias is what fills those pockets, those blind spots. And so it's like, oh, brain is, being lazy. So I'm going to just go ahead and fill this in. And we're like, no, what if you told bias to stand up and move aside so that you can actually fill that seat with the right information?
100%. I always think of it that way, that like you're biologically reacting the way that your brain wants you to, which is like, I need to put you in a category. I need to put you here so that I can process and then I can move on. And now I know how to interact with you. Mm-hmm. And if we were to only act in that way, and I really say this a lot, is that the reason why technology has advanced the way it has, but humans have not evolved at all in the last like 15, 20,000 years. I mean, let's be real. If you go back to the stories of Caesar and Cleopatra, they were dealing with the same crap that we're dealing with today. So this notion that we've evolved is like, no, we really haven't. And it's because we've allowed ourselves to continually and perpetually stay in this place of reaction, stay in this space of our biology requires us to, I need to label you. And because the effort and the conscious effort that it takes to actually pause and say, let me not have a knee-jerk reaction to this, and let me actually add the context and the layers and the questions. And before I, respond, it requires energy. And we, as a society and in a capitalistic society, don't benefit from that. And so that is where I think why technology has just created a space for it to just perpetuate that. So technology benefits from us as humans to stay in a chronically reactive space.
100%. I will send you an offering for that wonderful sermon that you just gave, because 100%. Yeah. I mean, we are very reactive. We have this need for speed, and our brain is doing that. And also, I think it's just, I love how you highlighted that it doesn't matter what time you've existed. Humans have always been the same way. It doesn't matter if you are in 2025 or you are in 25. Like whatever year it is, you are still going to have the same emotions, same reactions, and same thought processes, because we're trying to figure out, I think, how did you say, like, we're on to the next thing. Is this safe? Is this not safe? Okay. All right. It's safe enough. Now I'm on to this. And it's like, oh, is this person? Oh, no, I don't think I want to deal with this. That intentional pausing, that intentional use of energy, because to your point, the neuroscience of it all is that to use our executive brain, our prefrontal cortex, that requires a lot of energy. And our brain was like, we're trying to conserve. So let's just move back to our limbic system. And if we need to, we'll go back to our, primitive brain and go back to this, our brainstem and just react.
Which is where we are right now, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. To go back to that piece about emotional expression, emotional intelligence, emotional maturity as the layers of whether it's ethnicity, culture, religion, everything that we take into, who this human is.
Yeah.
We were talking about the fact that, and you mentioned this about, relating to the Haitian community in certain ways, but yet the dynamic of your own family is also different. I've had this happen in the workplace, where I had a colleague, she's very sweet, but this was when Mindy Kaling came out with the show Never Have I Ever. Mm-hmm. And, now you have, for the first time, an Indian family that's being depicted a certain way, but Mindy Kaling very much projected herself in that and showed, this teenage girl who's ridden with anxiety, who's insanely insecure and is just boy crazy and all of those things, which I think is like very normal for quite a few, for teenagers and all that kind of stuff. But there was also these other layers of just like the Indian culture that were added into it. Now, I love the show from the fact of like, just, great to see some South Asians on screen, on Netflix, all that. But anyways, I go into work and this colleague of mine says, "Oh my gosh, did you watch Never Have I Ever?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I did." She's like, "I had no idea that Indian girls also were like had crushes on boys. Like every Indian girl in my school, like I just like saw them as studious. They'd go home and study and everything." I'm like, yeah, Indian girls, like we have this thing that we surpass the hormonal craze and we just like kind of like that just doesn't happen for us. So yeah, that is kind of strange. I just made a joke out of it because it was just so ridiculous, right? But it was this idea that, there's this depiction of Indians as we're studious, we're smart, we're, get into great schools, we have great jobs, we're the doctors, engineers, all this kind of stuff. And this notion that it's like that we're not human who experience the same biological development stages as a white girl does.
Yeah, but it also highlights what I'm trying to be mindful of my words, but that so much of the global collective understands that though we are the global majority, so many of the systems that are in place were not created by the global majority. In knowing that, there has been subconscious learning about this minority group that has taken the majority presence in terms of hierarchy or system, etc. So I always find it interesting where there's a comment like this that is like rooted in ignorance. And I'm saying this in the truest of the words definition, of just not knowing. And also recognizing it shouldn't have to be that way if you would just look around, so to assume, oh, I didn't realize Indian girls had crushes. Okay. What made you think that? Because if you actually paid attention, you would have recognized that all girls at some point in time are going to have feelings for, another kid, maybe older, you got crushes if you were, Backstreet Boys. Or
right. You got your celebrity crushes.
Right. Whatever. But I feel like we have learned to really pay attention to the white culture, whether it's within the classroom, whether it's in the boardroom, television, we see their culture depicted as the primary culture to know about. Yet there were also other shows that, you could have watched a Spanish channel. You could have watched, a predominantly, African American channel, depending, I'm speaking obviously to the people who are here in the US, but I know that there's other channels that other people, other cultures, are predominant, telenovelas or whatever. And it's like, you could have learned. Right. You chose not to,
And in that moment in a workplace, if we reframe that question, if you're like, all right, I don't know, maybe they didn't watch any of the other channels like you're saying, like, yes, those are available. And in that moment, you could have asked, hey, I just watched Never Have I Ever. Have you seen it? Yes, I've seen it. I'm so curious, as someone who's Indian, what are your thoughts on the way that it was depicted?
That would have been smart, but people don't communicate in that way. People are quick to, because when you think about it, she had a belief that young Indian girls did not think about boys, watched one show, And it was an episode where there's, boy crushes. Now, instead of actually really investigating, it's like, oh, I'm just going to change this belief now. It's like, oh, Indian girls do have crushes. But again, to your point of nuance, like there's still so many things that you're missing in between, thought A and thought B. And that question that you asked is a very insightful, it's a very humble, and it's a very productive question, because the answer that comes after that will allow you to go like, oh, okay, let me chew on this a minute, because how many times am I doing this? Am I just projecting my thoughts onto groups of people without really taking the time to go, well, does this truly represent everybody?
And I think that it's the conversation about that emotional nuances and understanding it goes back to take a moment to learn before you form an opinion, right? Like take a moment, like, yeah, you're going to have those initial thoughts and opinions for sure. Everyone has them. And in that same moment, can you say, oh, wait a second, before I turn this into a belief, let me actually learn about it. Let me actually ask questions about it. Let me get curious about this. Then I will think about, okay, maybe I need to reframe my belief about this. And I look at that, and again, just taking it from that perspective of Mindy Kaling, and she's created other shows, but what you see in her shows consistently is that she always depicts the Indian girl in the shows as a very insecure person. It's very obvious that that is and she's really openly shared that, like, it is a projection of like experiences of herself growing up. I think that's important to, again, that piece of Mindy Kaling was a South Asian girl, Indian girl growing up, I think in like Boston area or something like that. So it's like growing up, in the Northeast, and I actually don't know exactly where she grew up, but somewhere around there. Anyways, regardless, it's an Indian girl who was born and raised in America, growing up in a South Indian family, and what she experienced, right? Which is going to be different than what I experienced growing up in a North Indian family. Yeah. And I think that is even, like we were talking about, the understanding of the dynamics that even within your own culture, even within your own nation. I mean, even if we look at the United States, right? Like, forget about taking all these other places, but if we look at the United States, like,
oh my gosh,
it's so big. Like, we have Southern culture, we got East Coast culture, we got West Coast culture, we got mountain culture, and Midwest culture, right? Like, there are those differences. And even recognizing that, recently I just went to a friend's wedding in Dominican Republic. It was an Indian wedding, but majority of her friends who are Indian, but they grew up in Atlanta, in Houston, in Birmingham, right? And I'm here coming from like LA, like, and there's a whole other interaction to that. And so I think that even that piece of the way that we create guilt and these expectations and pressure within our own community, that I'm curious to your perspective on. A lot of times within ethnic communities or just any communities, and immigrants, like there's this pressure of, survival, success, making it in this new country, something that, your parents or whatever generation came here did that. And then the next generation is assimilating a little bit more. The next generation is assimilating it even more than that. There's again this like grievance of losing a part of that culture. But I also see that as this is what our world has been for generations, thousands of years, is that we have always as humans migrated into places. So the culture that we are so deeply just holding on to is also an evolvement from a separate migration. Like if you think about the West Indies, right? What was that? That was also, you have tons of Indians that actually live there who came there on a slave trade. People don't realize that Indians were also traded for slave and slavery. And so they've come there. So the experience of like a Fiji Indian, a Caribbean Indian, and a Indian from India, the subcontinent, is going to be extremely different.
Yep.
And this expectation that is put on then within it and the grievances. So I'm so curious to, how do you then talk about emotional expression and emotional maturity within the layers of generation that are now starting to assimilate into the country and the space that they have migrated?
Oof. Okay. That's a really great question. Prefaced it so well on highlighting the fact that culture is constantly evolving, and the fact that very few of us are in the homeland that their, original ancestors came from. And so I think we're always looking for identity, sometimes too much externally that we end up causing more harm to ourselves and to others. You know, we're judging others and we're judging ourselves because we're not enough this or we're not enough that. And I know that we're not going to go into the space that I don't think I'm qualified for, but especially for those who are of like mixed race and mixed ethnicities. You know, am I white or am I black? Am I Japanese or am I, you know, South African or whatever? And it's like, are we taking the time? And I love what you said, you know, earlier on just having that human experience. Like before I give you a label of woman, you know, your ethnicity, the country you're from, the language you speak, your sexual preference, like strip all of that off. Who are you? Right? There's the line of like, once you meet one autistic person, you've met just one autistic person. And I feel like once you meet a person, you've just met a person, you know? So the whole thing is if you are Black by our, you know, way of defining race, that doesn't mean that every Black person you've met has had the same experience. Haiti's a small country, but there is definitely differences based off of region, just how we talked about in the United States. So there's a difference in dialect. There's a difference in, you know, how food is even prepared. There's all these things. So like I have a friend who's Haitian, but she was born here. And there's certain words that I'll say in Creole, and she's like, "What is that?" And I was like, "You've never heard of that?" And I was like, but my parents were raised in Port-au-Prince, which is the capital of Haiti. And so in a way you can kind of say it's like the New York or the big city of it. And so, and her family was more from like the countryside. And so there are certain things that she would say. And I was like, why do you pronounce it that way? Like that just seems so weird. And so again, if you meet one person, you literally just meet one person. You want to be able to have some level of capacity to hold some things that you know, like out here, like, oh, I know this about Haitian culture. I know this about Haitian culture, but that does not mean to say that those things that I know about Haitian culture define Farah. I know this about, you know, North Indian culture. I know this about, but wait, I got to remember Payal wasn't born in India. She was raised in these other, okay. So I kind of have to put certain things at bay as I'm learning more about this individual. And so what I'm really hoping that people can just be more empathetic with and more patient with is recognizing we don't fit in any boxes. Like none of us fit in a box. I don't know who decided to make a box.
Green.
There you go. And so it's like none of us fit in boxes, but yet we keep trying to put ourselves or someone else in a box that does not hold us, that does not have the space and room to embrace all the different facets of who we are. And I think it does us a disservice when we do that. It causes more harm because you don't get a chance to fully allow a person to express themselves the way that they want to express themselves because you believe this group shouldn't, you know, respond in this manner. In my latter part of the book, I want to say maybe it's in the middle, where, you know, I highlight a conversation that I have with a clinician who's the owner of a group practice and all the work that she's had to do with parents who are Black and brown parents and how she's trying to educate them that they were in a way stifling the natural development of their children and how they express themselves because of systemic issues where they're like, well, I don't want my brown or my Black child to be perceived as fill in the blank. So if you're upset about something a teacher did, or you're frustrated about something that a peer did, you know, you got to hold that and you kind of have to be stoic and you have to be non-confrontational and you can't fully express yourself because I don't want the teacher to view you in this negative lens. Or if you're dealing with like law enforcement, you know, and they're doing it as a survival tactic and it makes complete sense. But in the process of them trying to protect their children, they're actually causing harm because now these children don't know how to naturally emote because they've learned that feelings don't really have a place, or at least my feelings don't have a place. But little Susie, who, you know, is a white girl, or, you know, little Bobby, who's a white boy, they can express their feelings and not necessarily have this negative repercussion that I believe, you know, my group or demographic may have. And so that's the part that's really frustrating, which is why I was talking about like that double-sided mirror. It's like, you know, we see ourselves, but then others are seeing us too. And more often than not, we're not seeing the same reflection.
I think that's such a beautiful frame of thinking and what could be a great takeaway for these listeners is that when you are engaging with someone and you're about to ask a question and you're about to ponder, like take a beat, take a moment, and just remember, you're talking to this particular person. You're not talking to, this person hasn't chosen to be the ambassador for their culture or for their like neurodivergence or for whatever it is. And you're talking to this person. And so then to take it as, yeah, I may be learning some context, like, you know, when friends ask me about Diwali or when they ask me about, you know, so, okay, tell me a little bit about like, you know, Indian weddings. And I'm like, okay, well, there's Punjabi weddings, there's Tamil weddings, there's Gujarati weddings, like, you know, so let me tell you about Punjabi weddings because I'm Punjabi. So this is how, and then there's Punjabi Hindu weddings, there's Punjabi Sikh weddings, like, you know, and so it's like, let me tell you about that. And then let me tell you about like, oh, and then of course, if you're in a different socioeconomic group, then suddenly it's like, you know, you just had a Louis the 14th style wedding, or like if you are like in the village, right? Like it's just, it all applies. And so it's the layers of that. And so when you're talking to that person, you're talking to this person and the experience that they know because of their experiences of the world.
100%.
And so being able to accept that and that two mirror thing, I want to talk to you longer. Oh my God. Okay. We're going to have to do another episode, but
we can talk again.
It's just part one, people. I want to end it with asking you the question of, if you could reframe one thing about how we understand emotional intelligence across cultures, what would it be?
That we don't season our chicken the same. So let us not judge how someone emotes without first understanding why they emote in that way. Yeah.
It's beautiful. I love that. And I hope every single person here they need to buy your book. They need to understand how to season differently and embrace it. And just like, you know, one of the things that I also just find is, let's replace the word like, oh, that's so weird that you guys do this with, oh, that's so different. You know, because when we're saying weird, now we're judging them for having something different. But it's like, oh, wow, that's something I've never experienced before. That's interesting. That's different, you know? Let's
have the correct reframe. That is absolutely beautiful. And it's funny. I was thinking about, and I don't remember what their handle is on Instagram, but it's a mixed ethnic couple. He's Asian. I don't remember what Asian country he's from. She's Black. I don't know what kind of Black she is. So that's to see. I'm just letting everybody know. But he cooks all these different dishes, you know, so it's like, okay, one day we're going to do Dominican. And of course, you know, people in the comments are giving, you know, suggestions like, oh, make some jollof rice, or, you know, make this or make that. And when I'm thinking about, yeah, we don't season chicken the same, it's like he literally can take one main ingredient, a chicken, and literally create all these different dishes that highlight a culture, that give history, that tell stories, that brings connection. And it's so cool when he does it because you can tell he was intentional on learning how to do it properly. Not like, oh, yeah, I'm going to, you know, make this, you know, dish that, you know, is traditional in South Africa, and not really take into interest why they do it this way. You know, why they took the time to marinate the chicken in this way, or he follows the directions to a T. And so he's like, you know, whether it's, hey, somebody's grandmother, let me know the recipe or, you know, whatever. But when you do that, it makes those who are part of that culture feel so seen. And I think to the mission of what you do and the mission to what I do is that we're really trying to create spaces where people feel like they could belong and that they're seen. And it doesn't matter, you know, what, again, check of the box that we're filling, but that experience of how we're feeling in the presence of that other person, where we're not feeling judged, where that curiosity is actually from a place of humility to find a way to connect with you more. Like, it's such a beautiful thing. And I just really, really hope that people just take a moment to go like, yo, the world is fast and we're not necessarily moving in the best and healthy direction, but we all have like our own personal, agency and ability and leadership to create spaces that we want to show up and that we also allow others to show up well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being on. Thank you so much for this lovely conversation. I just love laughing with you, talking about this, and just being very real about it. Let's celebrate that differences aren't anything to be scared of. It's something to embody and embrace. So Thank you so much. How can people connect with you?
Yeah, so you can learn more about my work at workingwelldaily.com. I share a lot of content on LinkedIn, even though it's being weird with its algorithm. But if you follow me on LinkedIn, it's Farah Harris, LCPC. And then there's my book. You can get it at wherever books are sold. It's also on Audible. And yes, I do narrate it. So you hear my voice. It took a while because these kids were not allowing me to have space to do it, but finally was able to do that last fall. And so again, yeah, get The Color of Emotional Intelligence. And I think that's it.
Great. We'll have all of that in the description for everyone. So everything will be linked. But thank you so much again, Farah. This was so lovely. And I can't wait to have you back to talk more about the nuances of emotional expression.
Thank you for having me. I so enjoyed this conversation.